Dusk bled slowly across the western sky, a burnished copper light spilling over the jagged ridges of redstone. The wind came dry and restless, carrying the scent of dust and sage as if it whispered of things best left unspoken. In that half-light, a lone rider moved along the rim of a canyon so wide it seemed to swallow the fading sun. His silhouette stretched long and lean against the horizon, a dark figure astride a black Mustang whose hooves struck the earth with a sound both patient and foreboding. The man's name was Cole, though few alive would know it. He wore the road the way other men wore a second skin, every motion slow and deliberate, like someone who had learned that haste was a friend of death. His coat, the color of worn charcoal, flapped in the evening gusts, and the brim of his hat cast a shadow that hid his eyes. Only the edges of a weathered face caught the last rays of light, revealing the hard plains of a man who had walked through fire and kept walking. The trail beneath him wound through scrub and sandstone, narrow and treacherous in places where the rock fell away into empty space. Cole's gaze never wandered from the land ahead, but the stillness of his posture belied a constant awareness. Each sound, the scrape of hoof on stone, the far-off cry of a hawk, was measured and weighed. Somewhere behind that quiet vigilance lay a story carved in grief, one he carried without speaking, like a secret scar beneath the heart. As night began to creep in, memories pressed against the edges of his mind. The smell of smoke had once meant home, the hearth fire in a cabin tucked among cottonwoods, laughter echoing off rough-hewn beams. But another fire had taken it all, a roaring, merciless blaze fed by more than wood and kindling. He saw again the blackened remains of a homestead, the air thick with ashes and the metallic taste of loss. He had dug the grave himself, hands blistered and raw, beneath a sky that gave no comfort. No marker bore the name of the woman he buried there. Only he remembered the way her hair had caught the morning light, the quiet strength of her voice. Justice, if such a thing existed, had become the only prayer he still believed. The Mustang's ears flicked forward. Cole tightened the reins slightly, feeling the animal's tension ripple through muscle and bone. A faint sound carried on the wind, soft, almost imagined, but enough to sharpen the line of his jaw. Hoofbeats, distant yet deliberate, echoed faintly through the canyon. He slowed his pace, letting the rhythm of his own mount fall into silence. The pursuing steps faded, then resumed, like a shadow keeping time with his own. He guided the horse down a sloping path into a narrow gorge where the walls rose steep and red, the sky above a darkening ribbon. Here the air cooled and the scent of mesquite mingled with the dry tang of stone. Cole dismounted near a cluster of boulders, leading the Mustang by the reins while he scanned the rim. The wind shifted and brought with it another scent, wood smoke, faint but fresh, curling from some hidden hollow not far away. Someone had made camp before the light died completely. Cole crouched, fingers brushing the ground. The earth was warm where embers had recently burned, a scatter of ash too fine to be more than a few hours old. He found a footprint beside it, half filled with dust but deep enough to belong to a man who carried weight and purpose. The print angled east, toward the same trail he traveled. Whoever had left it wasn't wandering. He straightened, eyes narrowing as the first stars prickled the indigo sky. The night creatures began their chorus, the rasp of crickets, the distant howl of a lone coyote. But to Cole every natural sound only sharpened the absence of another. The quiet between those hoofbeats was louder than any noise. He felt it in his chest, a pressure that was part memory, part warning. He had been hunted before. Once in the war, when enemy scouts trailed him through thickets and riverbeds, he had learned the value of silence and patience. Tonight those lessons returned as naturally as breath. The Mustang shifted, its muscles bunching beneath a sleek coat that gleamed even in the moon's pale rise. Cole stroked the animal's neck, murmuring a low wordless sound that steadied them both. He thought of turning back, of setting a trap in the dark, but something deeper urged him forward. This journey was not one of escape. It was a reckoning drawn by the invisible lines of fate. Whoever followed would show their hand soon enough. Moonlight spilled across the canyon floor, washing the rocks in silver. Cole mounted again, his movements fluid, and guided the horse toward a narrow pass where the cliffs opened to a stretch of high desert. Sagebrush rolled like dark waves beneath the night sky. He rode with the ease of a man who belonged nowhere and everywhere, his shadow a thin ribbon beside him. Behind, the faint cadence of hoofbeats returned, clearer now in the still air. They were not hurried, but steady, measured by riders who knew the art of pursuit. Cole neither quickened his pace nor slowed it. He let the sound trail him, a reminder that the past was never far and justice demanded patience. He felt no fear, only the cold resolve of a man who had already lost what mattered most. There was nothing left for them to take. Hours later, when the first hints of dawn brushed the eastern rim with pale gold, Cole reached a rise overlooking a vast plain. The world opened before him in a sweep of desolation and promise, the horizon endless and raw. He paused there, letting the Mustang breathe while he scanned the distance. Far to the south, a thin column of smoke spiraled upward, too straight to be the work of chance. A campfire dying, perhaps, or a signal meant to lure. He adjusted the rifle slung across his saddle, the familiar weight of it a quiet assurance. The barrel caught the morning light for a heartbeat before he covered it again with his coat. He could wait here and force the meeting, or ride on and draw them deeper into the country he knew better than most men knew their own hearts. Either way, the trail would end as it must. The sun broke fully over the land, setting the red canyons ablaze with color. Cole nudged the Mustang forward, the two of them cutting a solitary figure against the waking desert. Behind him, somewhere in the labyrinth of stone and shadow, the unseen riders followed. The day ahead would tell their intent. For now, the only sound was the steady beat of hooves and the whisper of the wind carrying stories of vengeance and a justice long delayed. The sun was sinking when Cole first glimpsed the weathered rooftops of Red Mesa, a scatter of leaning buildings huddled at the edge of a vast, copper-colored plain. The settlement looked less like a town and more like a memory of one. Boarded windows rattled in the evening wind, and the single main street lay half-buried in drifting sand. A church bell, long rusted silent, hung crooked in its frame, catching the last glow of daylight like an old wound that refused to close. He rode in slow, the black Mustang's hooves muffled by the dust. A few faces appeared behind curtains and doorframes, sharp-eyed, measuring, quick to vanish. Cole felt their scrutiny like the prickle of dry grass against skin. Red Mesa was a place that had learned suspicion the hard way, and he carried the look of a man who gave no reason for comfort. He dismounted before the saloon, the only building with a flicker of life. Light seeped through warped shutters, yellow against the deepening blue of evening, and the muffled thrum of a piano faltered as he pushed open the batwing doors. Inside, the air smelled of lamp oil and old whiskey. Lanterns cast trembling halos across walls scarred by years of careless bullets. A handful of patrons hunched at the bar, their voices dropping to murmurs when they noticed the newcomer. The floorboards creaked under Cole's boots, each step drawing eyes as if the sound itself carried warning. He removed his hat and let the shadows slide from his face. Weathered features told of long roads and longer regrets. The set of his jaw discouraged questions. The barkeep, a thin man with a beard the color of ash, polished a glass with deliberate care. His gaze flicked from Cole's revolver to his steady hands before settling on his eyes. "Evenin'," he said, voice low and dry as mesquite. "Don't see many riders come through after dark." "Wasn't planning to stop," Cole replied, the rough edge of trail dust still in his throat. "Needed water." The barkeep nodded toward a corner table. "Water's cheap. Whiskey's cheaper tonight. Folks drink when they're scared." Cole felt the room tighten around that last word. Scared of what? The men leaned in just enough for his whisper to carry. "Larkin gang's been prowling these parts. Word is they're riding north, talking whatever they fancy. Ranches burnin', travelers vanishin'. Red Mesa's small pickings, but small's enough when men like that get hungry." A gust rattled the shutters, and a lantern flame jumped, throwing long shadows across the saloon. Cole kept his face impassive, but something in his chest hardened. He'd heard of the Larkin gang, stories of raids swift and merciless, of families left in ashes. He'd followed rumors like these across miles of wilderness, each tale another breadcrumb leading toward the man who had burned his world to the ground. The barkeep studied him a moment longer. "You ride alone?" Cole sipped the whiskey placed before him. Its burn familiar, a brief warmth against the cold purpose inside. "Always." The men nodded as if that explained everything, then moved away to tend a pair of card players who spoke in hushed tones. From the far corner came the plaintive twang of the piano, the melody wandering like a lost soul. Cole let it wash over him, the notes stirring memories he usually kept buried. Once, music like that had drifted through a different night, campfires along a river during the war, when he served as a scout for the Union Army. He remembered slipping through enemy lines, reading the land like scripture, vanishing into darkness before gunfire could find him. They'd called him Dead-Eye Cole, a name whispered with equal parts respect and dread. He had led men through swamps and deserts, guided them by starlight, and disappeared when the fighting ended, as though the war had swallowed him whole. Legends grew in the silence he left behind. Some said he'd been killed, others that he'd turned outlaw himself. The truth was simpler and sadder. He had gone home to a wife and a patch of land, believing peace could hold. It hadn't. He drained a glass, the burn of whiskey no match for the ache behind his ribs. The saloon door creaked again and a cold draft swept through, carrying a scent of approaching rain and something more metallic, anticipation, perhaps, or the nearness of violence. Cole's hand rested lightly near his holster, a gesture so subtle only a trained eye would notice. Outside, the street had darkened to a ribbon of shadow. Through the gaps in the shutters he caught a glimmer of movement at the town's edge, lantern lights swaying like fireflies. Riders. He listened, separating the sounds of the night, until he heard the faint, deliberate rhythm of multiple horses pacing the perimeter. The Larkin gang didn't announce themselves with gunfire. They liked the slow tightening of fear. Cole rose and walked to the door. The piano fell silent as if the keys themselves sensed the change. He pushed through the batwings and stepped onto the porch, the wood beneath his boots groaning softly. The air tasted of dust and storm. In the distance, faint silhouettes shifted along the ridge, men on horseback, their outlines broken by the shimmer of heat still rising from the day's baked earth. They moved with the patience of predators, circling. The barkeep joined him, wiping his hands on a rag he no longer needed. "They've been watching since sundown," he said quietly. "Testing us." "How many?" "Hard to say. 6, maybe more. They like to make you guess." Cole's eyes never left the horizon. He could feel the town holding its breath behind him, the people of Red Mesa shrinking back into shadows, praying the night would pass them by. But prayers were thin shields against men like the Larkins. He understood their methods: wear down the nerves, let dread do the work before a single shot is fired. It was a dance he'd seen in other places, other wars. The Mustang stood tied outside the saloon, ears twitching, muscles tense. Cole reached into his coat and checked the rifle slung beneath the saddle, the motion quick and quiet. His fingers brushed the worn stock, the familiar weight of it steadying his thoughts. He did not plan to start a fight, but he knew how swiftly choice could be taken. From somewhere beyond the ridge came a short, sharp whistle. The riders stilled. Silence fell heavy over Red Mesa, broken only by the faint clang of a loose sign swinging in the wind. Cole's pulse slowed rather than quickened. The night was about to declare itself. Behind him the barkeep spoke again, barely above a breath. "You best find shelter, stranger. If they come, walls won't stop him, but at least you'll have something to put between you and the dark." Cole slipped his hat lower over his eyes. "Walls won't matter," he said, voice even. "Men like that don't fear wood or stone." The first stars emerged, cold and sharp against the velvet sky. Somewhere in the darkness a horse snorted, answered by another. The circle was tightening. Cole rested one hand lightly on the saloon's rail, and let the night seep into his senses. He had come here on a trail of vengeance, and fate, always patient, was finally stepping into view. The first color of morning spilled like pale fire across the desert when Cole left Red Mesa behind. The Mustang moved with the easy strength of a creature bred for hard miles, its breath rising in small clouds that vanished in the cool dawn. The town lay silent in the rear horizon, a smudge of shadow against the red-stained earth. Ahead stretched a maze of canyons, their jagged walls catching the newborn light and throwing it back in shards of crimson and gold. Cole rode without haste, but every sense was drawn tight as wire. He knew the Larkin gang would not let him slip away untested. The trail narrowed as the sun climbed, the sky turning a hard blue that promised heat. Cole guided the horse through a cleft where the rock rose high on either side, walls sheer and close enough that sound bounced back with a whispering echo. He recognized the geography, a box canyon disguised as a pass. His jaw tightened. It was the perfect place to trap him in. The wind carried a faint metallic scent, gun oil or sweat, and the Mustang's ears flicked back. He slowed to a stop, scanning the cliffs where shadows clung like dark sentries. A hawk cried somewhere overhead, and in that instant the silence shattered. A rifle cracked, the bullet sparking against stone inches from his shoulder. The report rolled through the canyon like thunder. Cole slid from the saddle in one fluid motion, pulling the Mustang with him behind a jut of rock. Dust plumed where the shot had struck, drifting through the sunlight like powdered rust. Another shot followed, then another, ricocheting off the canyon walls in a vicious chorus. Shapes emerged along the rim, figures on horseback, dark against the brightening sky. They moved with practiced malice, their rifles glinting as they took positions above. Cole counted at least 8, maybe more hidden in the folds of stone. The Larkin gang had planned well. He unslung his rifle, the walnut stock smooth and familiar against his palm. The Mustang trembled but held steady under a soft word. Cole peered through a narrow gap, tracking the faint motion of a hat brim on the left ridge. He exhaled, slow and measured, and fired. The shot cracked sharp and clean. A rider jerked backward, rifle clattering as he toppled out of sight. Echoes rolled like distant drums. For a heartbeat the canyon went still. Then the world erupted. Bullets hissed and sparked, chips of red rock stinging Cole's face. He shifted behind cover, mind already charting angles and distances. The canyon that threatened to cage him also offered a map of escape if he read it right. He fired again, then moved, each motion precise, almost serene. Dust swirled in golden shafts of morning light, masking his position while his rifle spoke with deadly rhythm. Another outlaw cried out, the sound cutting short as he fell. Above, curses echoed, their frustration growing. They had expected a cornered traveler, not a man who fought like a ghost. Cole felt the old training awaken, the instincts honed in wartime raids where silence and speed meant survival. He shifted from rock to rock, using every contour of the land, every shadow and echo, until his shots seemed to come from everywhere at once. The gang began to hesitate, their formation unraveling under the pressure of unseen precision. A sudden sear of pain tore across his left shoulder. He staggered back, teeth clenched as warm blood spread beneath his coat. The shot had come from a narrow perch high above, a marksman patient enough to wait for his move. He pressed a gloved hand to the wound, feeling the sticky heat, and forced himself to breathe. Pain was a distraction. He could not afford it. He whispered to the Mustang, sending it deeper behind the rocks where it would be harder to hit. Gunfire resumed, frantic now, the outlaws pouring bullets into stone. Cole used the lull between volleys to slip toward a higher ledge, each step a test of balance and resolve. The canyon's red walls glowed in the sun, their fractures offering both risk and refuge. He climbed with quiet determination, the weight of his rifle steadying him more than any handhold. Dust rained from above as another bullet ricocheted, singing past his ear. Reaching a narrow shelf, he crouched low and scanned the rim. The gang was repositioning, some dismounting to climb down and flush him out. He saw a flash of movement to his right, a man edging along a slope, confident in his angle. Cole raised the rifle, heart steady, and fired. The outlaw's cry was brief, swallowed by the canyon's vast echo. Shouts erupted from the others, anger laced with unease. One voice rose clearer than the rest, rough and disbelieving. Deadeye, it's Deadeye Cole. The name cracked across the stone like another shot. The words rolled through the canyon, carrying a weight that stilled the air. Cole felt the past close in, the war camps, the whispered legends of the scout who never missed. He had not heard that name in years, yet it fit him still, like an old coat pulled from memory. The outlaws hesitated, the myth they'd hunted now flesh before them. Fear settled in their ranks, sharp as the smell of gunpowder. He used their pause to move again, circling toward a ridge where the leader barked orders. Each step left a faint trail of blood, but his grip on the rifle never faltered. He reached a vantage point where the canyon opened below, the gang exposed against the rising sun. Cole exhaled, eyes narrowing to a single point of focus. One by one he picked them off, each shot deliberate, echoing like judgment through the morning air. Panic broke their cohesion. Some scrambled for the exit, others fired wildly, bullets sparking harmlessly off stone. Cole advanced with the relentless calm of a man fulfilling a promise. His wounded shoulder burned, but the pain only sharpened his resolve. When the last of them fled toward the far pass, he let them run. The canyon belonged to silence once more. The wind returned, carrying the scent of spent powder and warm rock. Cole stood alone amid the echoes, the name Deadeye lingering like smoke. He wiped the blood from his sleeve and looked to the sky where the hawk still wheeled, indifferent to men and their battles. The Mustang nickered softly, stepping from its shelter as if drawn by the quiet. Cole rested a hand on its neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the sleek hide. The sun had fully claimed the canyon, painting the walls with blazing color. Cole breathed deep, the taste of iron and dust mixing on his tongue. The ambush had failed, but the trail was far from done. Somewhere beyond these red walls the Larkin gang's leader still rode, and justice, once stirred, demanded more than a single victory. He mounted, wincing at the pull on his wound, and turned toward the narrow pass that led deeper into the wild. The echoes of gunfire faded behind him, but the legend of Deadeye Cole rode forward, alive in every whisper of the wind. The desert noon burned white and merciless as Cole rode from the canyon's shadow into open country. Heat shimmered above the hardpan, warping the horizon into a wavering mirage. Behind him, the survivors of the ambush scattered like startled quail, but one trail cut clear and deliberate toward the Badlands, a single rider pushing hard. Cole recognized the pattern, the leader breaking away, hoping the men he left behind would buy enough time to vanish. It was a hope Jeb Larkin did not deserve. The Mustang's flanks darkened with sweat as Cole urged it onward. Each stride pounded through his wounded shoulder, but the pain sharpened his focus. He followed the fresh prints across sun-baked flats and through a tangle of mesquite until the land rose into rolling sandstone bluffs. There, in a hollow of crimson rock, he found the outlaw waiting. Jeb Larkin sat astride a dun mare, his broad frame backlit by the brutal sun. Dust streaked his face, but his eyes glinted with the cold humor of a man who had outrun lawmen and soldiers alike. A rifle rested casually across his saddle horn. He smiled when he saw Cole, as if the chase itself had been nothing more than a friendly wager. "Well now," Larkin drawled, voice dry as the desert wind. "I figured the legend of Deadeye Cole was just saloon talk. But here you stand, bleeding on my sand. I should feel honored." Cole reined in a few paces away, the Mustang pawing at the dust. "You left men to die in that canyon," he said, his voice low, steady. "You'll answer for more than that before the day's done." The outlaw's grin widened, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "And what's that? You aim to haul me back to some tin-star sheriff? We both know the law out here is as thin as that blood soaking your coat." Cole's eyes never wavered. "I aim to see you face justice, one way or another." Larkin tilted his head, studying him. "Justice," he mused. "I remember that word. Funny how it sounds different depending on who says it. You think you're the first one to chase me with a story about burned homes and dead kin." The word struck like a lash. Cole felt the old grief rise, hot and bitter, but he held it down. "You torched a ranch outside the Verde River Valley. Woman and child inside. You remember that." The outlaw's amusement faded. He shifted in the saddle, eyes narrowing as memory stirred. "Plenty of places burned in those days," he said, but the bravado rang thin. Cole nudged his horse closer, the distance between them tightening like a noose. "Her name was Clara. My wife. Our son was barely 2. You and your men rode through at dusk. Took what you wanted. Left only ashes." For a moment the desert held its breath. Even the wind seemed to still, as if the land itself awaited Larkin's answer. The outlaw's jaw tightened, a flicker of something, remorse or recognition, passing across his weathered face. "I don't recall every name," he said finally, though his voice had lost its ease. "But I remember a night of fire. We were mean with drink. One of the boys set a torch where he shouldn't have. I don't make excuses for it." Cole's grip on the reins widened. The sun beat down, hot enough to blur the edges of sight, yet his vision was sharp, every detail cut in crystal clarity. The gleam of sweat on Larkin's neck, the faint tremor in his fingers. "You murdered them," Cole said, each word a stone. "You'll answer for it here or in a court. Your choice." A rifle cracked behind the rocks to the left, and a bullet spat dust between them. Cole wheeled, spotting the ragged remnants of the gang cresting the bluff, 3 men, desperate but armed. At their front rode a youth with wild eyes and a hat too large for his head. He shouted a warning, voice breaking. "Jeb, don't." Larkin cursed and swung his rifle up, but before he could fire the young outlaw spurred forward, blocking his line. "Stop," the boy cried. "No more blood." Cole held his aim, reading the sudden tremor in the gang's approach. The boy turned, revealing a face not hardened like the others, cheeks streaked with grit and sweat but eyes startlingly clear. He raised empty hands toward Cole. "Don't shoot. Please. He's my kin by choice, not by blood." One of the older outlaws barked a laugh. "Kid's the sheriff's whelp from Dry Creek," he jeered. "Ran off last spring." The youth flinched but stood his ground. "My name's Eli," he said, voice steadier now. "My pa wears the badge you all spit on. I thought I wanted freedom, but this," he gestured to the men behind him, to Larkin's rifle still leveled. "This ain't it." Larkin's eyes flashed with sudden fury. "Get out of my way, boy." "No," Eli said, and there was iron in the single word. The standoff stretched taut. Heat shimmered in the air, carrying the smell of sweat and powder. Cole saw the fracture forming, the old outlaw's command crumbling beneath the weight of a boy's defiance. He lowered his rifle a fraction, voice cutting through the stillness. "Eli, step aside. But the youth shook his head. Not till he surrenders. I won't let another family burn for him. Something broke in Larkin's face then, a fissure of weary recognition. He looked from the boy to Cole and back, the fight draining like water through sand. Slowly, he let the rifle drop to his thigh. Hell, he muttered, the word more sigh than curse. Maybe the game's run its course. The remaining outlaws shifted uneasily. Without their leader's fire, they seemed suddenly smaller, their bravado leached away by the unyielding sun. Cole kept his weapon trained but felt the tide turn. Throw down your guns, he ordered. One by one, the men complied, iron clattering onto stone. Larkin swung down from his saddle, movement stiff but deliberate, and faced Cole across the narrow stretch of dust. You got what you came for, he said. What now, Deadeye? You gonna pull that trigger and call it justice? Cole dismounted, wincing as his wounded shoulder protested. He closed the distance until they stood an arm's length apart, the heat radiating between them like a forge. I could, he said quietly. Lord knows you deserve it. But I'll give you a choice. Stand trial. Face the families you've wronged. Or take your chances out here with me. Larkin studied him, eyes searching for mercy or weakness. He found neither. At last he gave a crooked smile that held no joy. Reckon I'll take the law. Might be the first honest thing I've done. Eli exhaled a shudder of relief, lowering his hands. Cole nodded once, signaling the boy to gather the weapons. The gang stood subdued, the desert sun a silent witness to the strange turn of justice. As they bound the outlaw's hands, Larkin looked at Cole with a trace of the old defiance. World'll keep on burning, Deadeye, he said. You can't stop it. Cole met his gaze, voice like gravel in resolve. Maybe not. But today it stops with you. The wind rose, carrying the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. Cole felt the weight of the moment settle deep, heavier than vengeance yet lighter than grief. He had not undone the past, but he had brought it to reckon. And as the small procession turned toward the distant town, the boy riding watchful beside the captured outlaw, a thin thread of redemption stitched itself across the endless, sun-blazed sky. The town of Dry Creek woke under a lavender dawn, the kind that softened even the hardest corners of the desert. Its single street glowed with the pale light of morning as Cole rode in, the Mustang's black coat streaked with dust and dried sweat. Behind him, bound and sullen, came the battered remnants of the Larkin gang. Their leader, Jeb Larkin, slumped in the saddle with wrists tied, the arrogance that once fueled him drained to silence. The few townsfolk brave enough to meet the morning air watched in wary awe, their whispers following the procession like a rising wind. The sheriff stepped from his office, a tall man with weary eyes that had seen more lawlessness than peace. He froze when he spotted the youngest outlaw, Eli, riding close behind Cole. Recognition flickered across the sheriff's face, part shock, part relief, and for a moment father and son stared at one another, words caught behind years of pride and hate. Eli dismounted first, voice shaking but clear. Pa, he said, I'm done running. The sheriff swallowed hard, then nodded once, a single gesture heavy with forgiveness. Whatever words came later, this was enough for now. Cole dismounted with quiet economy, every movement deliberate, as if he meant to leave no mark behind. He handed over the gang without ceremony, reciting their crimes in a voice that carried like low thunder. The sheriff listened, jaw tightening, and accepted the prisoners with the grim understanding of a man who knew what justice required. When he offered thanks, when he began to speak of rewards and bounties, Cole cut him short with a shake of the head. I came for justice, not coin, he said. Do with them as the law sees fit. The sheriff studied him a moment longer, perhaps recognizing the depth of grief that made gold meaningless. At least stay the night, he urged. This town owes you a drink and a warm bed. But Cole was already turning away. I'm not one for towns, he replied, and the finality in his tone silenced any further argument. He walked to the Mustang, patting the animal's neck with a hand roughened by war and loss. The horse pressed its muzzle into his palm as if understanding the miles still ahead. With a fluid motion he swung into the saddle, the wounded shoulder barely betraying pain. He tipped his hat once to the boy who had chosen redemption and to the sheriff who now held his own son again. Then he guided the black horse down the quiet street and toward the open land. By the time the sun climbed high, he was gone. That evening the saloon filled with restless talk. Miners and drifters leaned across scar tables, their voices low but urgent. They told of the lone rider who had delivered the Larkin gang like a phantom of frontier justice, a man who fought with the precision of legend and vanished before gratitude could find him. Some swore his eyes were cold steel, others that they shone with a sorrow deeper than the desert night. A few claimed he never bled despite the stories of his wound. Names passed from lip to lip: Cole, Deadeye, the ghost of Red Mesa, each embellished with the drama of whiskey and wonder. Around the campfires that dotted the surrounding hills, the story grew with each retelling. Children stared wide-eyed as their elders described the canyon battle where bullets ricocheted like angry stars and one man outshot a dozen. Cowboys riding the midnight trail swore they heard echoes of that gunfire carried on the wind, as if the canyon itself remembered. And always the tale ended the same. The rider refused payment, refused fame, and disappeared into the endless west. Weeks turned to months, and still the legend spread. Travelers swore they'd glimpsed a solitary figure on the far horizon, a dark silhouette against the dying sun, but none could say for sure. Some believed he was a spirit of vengeance sent by the Almighty, destined to roam until every cruel man faced reckoning. Others insisted he was flesh and blood, a soldier who had lost everything and found a higher calling. Arguments flared in saloons from Santa Fe to Dodge, each storyteller adding a new shade to the myth. Yet none could deny the truth of what he had done. The Larkin gang stood trial, their crimes laid bare, and the families who had suffered finally saw the law answer violence with justice. Eli remained in Dry Creek, working beside his father, earning each day the trust he had once thrown away. He spoke little of the rider who had brought him back from the brink, but on quiet nights he would walk to the edge of town and stare into the dark, as if expecting to see a black horse cross the moonlit plain. The sheriff, when pressed, would only say that some men choose the trail because the world behind them is too heavy to carry. Then he would raise a glass to the horizon, a silent salute to a stranger who had returned his son. Seasons shifted. Rain finally came to the desert, coaxing a brief riot of wildflowers from the baked earth. Cattle trails moved north and the railroad pushed its iron line ever farther west, but the name of the lone rider remained. Stagecoach passengers traded the story across miles of sage and sandstone, and even in bustling cities far from the frontier, newspapers printed breathless accounts of the mysterious marksman. Yet no wanted poster ever bore his likeness, no bounty ever sought his capture. He belonged to no law and broke none, a shadow among legends. On certain dusky evenings, when the wind carried the scent of mesquite and distant rain, an old piano in Red Mesa saloon would strike a slow, mournful tune. Those who listened claimed the music called forth the memory of a man riding through a canyon of fire and echo, his rifle steady, his heart unyielding. They would lower their voices and speak of him as if he might step through the door at any moment, head brim low, eyes unreadable, justice riding at his side. Far beyond those gatherings, Cole traveled alone. He followed no map, drawn only by the quiet need to keep moving. The land was wide and full of forgotten trails, pine-dark mountains where snow fell in gentle silence, sunlit valleys where rivers cut silver lines through the stone, barren flats where the stars burned like cold fire. In every place he left behind nothing but the soft imprint of hooves and the fleeting impression that someone had been there who understood both loss and mercy. Sometimes he camped near settlements and listened to the murmurs of his own story drifting from the flames. He never corrected the tellers. Their words belonged to the West now, just as he did. Justice was the only reward he sought, and it required no audience. One night, as he watched the moon lift over a silent ridge, he thought of Clara and the small boy whose laughter once filled a cabin by the river. The ache was still there, but it no longer burned like a brand. It had become something steadier, a quiet pulse that guided him onward. He touched the brim of his hat to the sky, a gesture of farewell and promise in one. By dawn he was a silhouette again, a lone figure moving where earth met heaven, the black Mustang stride sure and tireless. Behind him lay the whispers of 100 campfires, the gratitude of strangers, the weight of justice served. Ahead stretched the boundless west, untamed and eternal. And so the legend endured, not of vengeance, but of balance restored. The people remembered a man whose draw was as swift as lightning and whose heart, though scarred, beat for what was right. They spoke of a rider who asked nothing, claimed nothing, and vanished when his work was done. Whether mun or myth no longer mattered. In the great silence of the frontier, the story of Deadeye Cole rode on, a timeless echo of the justice the West could still believe in.